Wednesday, the apex of my week. Have you heard the latest news? The latest news is coming out of the College of Southern Idaho, where the Board of Trustees have suddenly, you may hear this in a newscast later today on KLIX, suddenly gotten religion. How did that happen? Well, they got this message that Governor Butch Otter said he wanted this program, refugee resettlement program, suspended for the time being till we could better vet refugees. And all of a sudden, all of these people who've been so dang obstinate for so long, when people have been coming in saying, hey, this could be a problem, suddenly says, Gadzooks, the governor's right. You know what? I just wet an index finger and I put it into the air and the wind direction changed. Gosh, the governor's a really smart guy and I agree with him 100%. A fellow who listens to our show on a regular basis sent me an email this morning just a few minutes ago and said, yeah, and they want to get reelected. he just bought them some cover. 7 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. There was an interview on CNN, and the governor of Delaware, which is formerly my home state, was being interviewed yesterday by Wolf Blitzer, the Roman gnome, and also Wolf Blitzer, native of Buffalo, New York, I should point out, a little bit more successful than the sports teams there. So Blitzer was interviewing this governor, and of course, in Delaware, they're going to continue taking refugees. And Blitzer cited Donald Trump saying it was an insane policy, and he looks at the governor and says, are you insane? Well, a little bit later in the program, we're going to have a guest in this studio who was actually an acquaintance, and possibly even a friend, of Delaware Governor Jack Markell. We are going to be joined by my friend, John Francis Brady. He is going to be dropping by a little later in the program. He's on his way to a conference in Las Vegas and decided to overnight in Twin Falls. He'd like to see the Snake River Canyon and get a good bite to eat. And so I said, you know what? There's a great hotel out on Blue Lakes Boulevard called Shiloh Inn, and he's there currently right now, but he'll be dropping by a little bit later in the program. And I want to play him that clip with his governor and see what his response is, because John's budget in his office comes from his county government, where he's the clerk of the peace. So he doesn't necessarily have to respect what his governor says, but we'll see when he gets here in the studio a bit later this morning. A couple of other guests coming up. Russell Singleton will be here. He's a physician assistant at Tripp Family Medicine, talking with us today about carcinogens. You may have heard Tripp Family Medicine on the air before with us. We do this every Wednesday. It's a public service. It allows people to actually call a medical professional and get some medical advice and talk to a friendly voice about some of these things too as well. And they are looking, of course, still for new patients. I almost said customers, but they like to consider you patients. It's a more friendly term. And they will actually be able to see patients on sometimes within a day or two, unlike a 3-week wait you may have sometimes otherwise. Tripp Family Medicine located on Fillmore Street right here in Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office, and the slogan there is, life's too short not to feel good. So getting back to this refugee situation, if I could, for just a moment. Eric Erickson, who's, as I mentioned before, main backup now for Rush Limbaugh, one of the main backups, hosts a show at WSB in Atlanta, one of the most listened to radio stations. He says it's the most listened to radio station in America. I think the title gets swapped back and forth. Our company, Town Square Media, owns a big talk station in New Jersey, which is called NJ101. And they do a regular show with Chris Christie, in fact. He hosts his own show there. Sometimes that is the number one rated talk station in America. So the title gets bandied about back and forth just because things change periodically in the number of people listening. Erickson writing this morning, and this is, I think, a great response to those people who are telling us we're being mean-spirited if we won't take in people. Imagine a scenario, he writes, where a Christian watches arsonists burning down a neighbor's home, then demands that you house the neighbor as their house is smoldering rubble. That is basically why we have a Syrian refugee crisis. A group of Christians and secularists demanded we do nothing while ISIS sacked, raped, and pillaged across the Middle East, displacing millions of Syrians. Now we are supposed to take them all in. Now we have a refugee crisis, and the American left and some vocal Christians are loudly proclaiming that their Christianity is better than our Christianity because they still want to let in Syrian refugees. Dwight Longnecker, who's a blogger, and I read his blog every day. He's a graduate of Bob Jones University. I've cited this before. He was an evangelical pastor, then he was an Anglican priest, now he's a Roman Catholic priest with a wife and family. Some priests out there are saying lucky guy. But he had a blog today saying, look, he agrees with Ted Cruz in the assessment that you take in the Christian refugees. He said, look, you've got plenty of Islamic countries that could take in the Islamic refugees. He said, I'm not opposed to Islam. I'm not at war with Islam, but they'd feel even more comfortable in their fellow Islamic countries. And he said, look, essentially America is still a Christian nation. That is his argument. And he said a lot of these people who would be coming here, the churches themselves could help house them and take them in, and the taxpayers wouldn't have to worry about it. Now, there's a notion somebody might want to consider at some point. 812, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Some people, however, continue to say that your fears about a terrorist attack are unfounded.
We are not well served when, in response to a terrorist attack, we descend into fear and panic. We don't make good decisions if it's based on hysteria or an exaggeration of risks.
So, as the smartest guy in the room and the rest of you are a bunch of dummies, I'm here to tell you that this program is going to go on, despite the fact that the majority of the American people now polled say they want it to stop, and that will cost my party the elections next year. But I'm done. I don't really care. You can kind of get in the guy's brain now and then, can't you? 8:14 now. Bill Colley with you on Top Story, and he says the opposition is simply going too far.
We're open to hearing actual ideas, but that's not really what's been going on in this debate. When candidates say we wouldn't admit 3-year-old orphans, that's political posturing.
Hello?
When individuals say that we should have a religious test and that only Christians, proven Christians, should be admitted.
Hello?
That's offensive and contrary to American values.
Well, of course, he's the arbiter of American values, Pope Obama. I'm glad to know that. First of all, he's referring to Ted Cruz when he said we should take in Christians, just the Christians. They would be a better match. I mean, they would probably meld much better into this culture of ours. We should note that. His reference to orphans, now that one gets me a little bit. Chris Christie said that the other day. My feeling is we should not bar 3-year-old orphans. I don't know that Christie said 3-year-old orphans, though, because Christie may have been referring to 15-year-old orphans. 15-year-old orphans might have another entirely different view of the United States and could well be in that part of the world. Many of these young boys, as young as 8 or 9, are trained in that terrorism. We've seen the videos posted by ISIS. Last night, Mr. Christie was appearing with Bill O'Reilly on The Factor on Fox.
The administration places them directly with non-governmental organizations, and they do not even give the administration in the state the courtesy of the information.
Give me an example of that. Do you have
we have about 75 Syrian refugees that have come in since January.
And again, his state has no control over any of this. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story. It's 8:15.
Good morning, Bill. I think everybody heard of that Islamic terrorist convicted in federal court in Boise in August of the plot to kill hundreds, if not thousands, of people in Boise, Idaho. Yesterday is the very first day that I heard it reported that he was here on the refugee program in Idaho.
Yeah, I think I'd heard that some months ago, but there was very little effort to make that clear.
We need a total investigation of that CSI refugee program. Who signed that terrorist document to bring that guy here? You know, I mean, I don't care if the UN is in charge of this or what. We have the right for security for our children in the state of Idaho, and people better wake up and demand that now, an investigation of CSI. Who signed that guy's documents?
We should also know James Comey, who is the director of the FBI, he's a Democrat. James Comey has said we can't properly vet these people. And then James Clapper, who's with the National Security Agency, has said the same thing. And these people are whispering these details into the ear of the president. And the president is simply ignoring that.
This is outrageous. The CSI extension in Haley, Idaho, the lady running that refugee program just less than a month ago was boasting she has brought in over 3,000 to 5,000 of these refugees in here. Now, what about, are the documents proper? Where are these people been placed? Are they in strategic positions to cause massive problems in the state of Idaho? We have a right to know these questions and how the answers to these questions, how much money these people are getting. People better get on the phone today before something really, really bad happens in the state of Idaho.
Yeah.
And it's very, very serious. This is not a joke.
Thank you for the call. As he pointed out, we need answers. What do you think you are, a taxpayer? Oh, right. You're paying the salaries of all of these people, and yet they think you're the servant. Here we go. This headline coming from Scott Greer, writing at the Daily Caller. It's un-American to impose refugee resettlement on the country. And he said, he goes on to mention this. Is America really just built upon the famous poem verse of Emma Lazarus asking for the world's huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore? See, that's a poem. It's not policy. Are we going to be ruled in this country by poetry? I've written some bad stuff myself. Perhaps that should become law. We could enshrine that, right? The United States, he says, is a country that is built on values handed down from the original settlers, mainly from the British Isles, Irish, Scottish, and English and Welsh. And he goes on to say the Harvard academic, he's passed away, Samuel Huntington, this guy was a genius, wrote in his phenomenal work, Who Are We?, that those early settlers gave this nation its Anglo-Protestant character, culture, and values. Immigrants who arrived after America's founding had to assimilate to the Anglo-Protestant culture of the settlers, often meaning they had to learn to speak English. Wow, there's a novel concept. Except America's political system had adopted a self-reliant work ethic. We have another caller with us about a minute before the break. You're up next. You're on the air on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. It's amazing how this all is going down, and we keep hearing how the majority of these people coming in are male. If you were trying to save your race, would you be sending all fighting age males? I mean, come on. This is almost ridiculous and ludicrous. And so far, almost all the terrorist attacks have occurred from refugees. I mean, come on. Sanaya brothers were refugees. These guys in Paris were refugees. Let's wake up. And as far as the president's concerned, quack, quack, I keep saying, quack, quack. If it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, must be a duck.
Hey, thank you much for the telephone call. Keep in mind, a lot of these people who have been causing terrorist attacks in the United States, as well as in Australia, as well as in Europe, as well as in some of the South Pacific, the islands in the South Pacific, they're not just Syrian refugees. These are people who've come here from other Islamic countries. So the problem is, ultimately, Islamic radicalism. Once again, people out there go, oh, he hates all Muslims, oh, that evil man on the radio. No, but there are some bad dudes among some of those people. And once again, it gets us back to that question, do we know what we're doing? More on this subject coming up in just a moment. I just happened to look up and see Jason Chaffetz on Fox News Channel. Now, Chaffetz, along with Congressman Raul Labrador from here in Idaho, they're really leading the charge in the background in Congress to get this law changed, which gives the president the ability to place all of these people wherever he chooses around the country. Isn't it interesting, too, for all of the critics? So you've got two Mormon congressmen coming from a religious faith, where you have some of the nicest people in America, and yet the critics are screaming, oh, they're being mean. No, they're not. They're being sensible. 823-38. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I want to remind you, in a few minutes, we're going to be joined by, it won't be Dr. Jonathan Tripp today. I believe it'll be Russell Singleton, physician assistant, coming up just after 8:30 from Tripp Family Medicine. In the meantime, I also want to tell you about our friends at Tint Lady of Idaho. Did you know? I got a great message from someone yesterday. We've been telling you that Tint Lady will put window tints in, and that can protect a lot of your furnishings and the like around your home. Did you know as well, these people do taxidermy, and they have a lot of people like the trophies on the walls. The window tints will block some of those harmful rays from the sun and protect a lot of those valuable trophies that you have in the home. And you can get a free estimate. They can do this for your home, your office, your automobile. You can call and schedule an appointment, 736-8469, or go online, tintladyidaho.com. Now, they've been in business nearly a quarter century, locally owned and operated. 1887 Highland Avenue East in Twin Falls, open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Saturday by appointment only, and closed on Sundays. You know, people do need to take a day off every now and then. Even your dairy farmers out there. I used to joke with a friend of mine. He was the best man at my wedding. He still milked in the morning. Cleaned up, put on a suit, and drove through a couple of hours of snow and came to the wedding. Got this story out of the op-ed pages at the Washington Times today. Peter Vincent Pry is executive director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security and served in the Congressional EMP Commission, the House Armed Services Committee, and the CIA. And he's writing today about electromagnetic pulse. America is an electronic civilization. Terrorists armed with rifles could cause a protracted blackout of the North American electric grid. A terror attack on just 9 key transformer substations could black out the nation for 18 months. Are we supposed to be worried? Mr. Obama says, no, we need to be compassionate, and we don't need to violate our values and our beliefs. We should go dark for 18 months if it need be. Yes, 825, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 736-0300, the telephone number, and you're up next. You're on air.
Yes, one of the things about this whole thing is that somehow the French have found new targets, and we have been fighting ISIS for 5 years. And whether or not it was a pipeline or trucks or an installment where they had training, or how the French found new targets that we have somehow been unable to find, and they're blowing them up. You see, when Obama sits there or stands there or whatever it is he's doing, and he tries to somehow justify what is happening, people make excuses for him all the time, and I say to myself, again, he in his book, in the Dreams of My Father, I will stand with the Muslims. I know I'm repeating myself, but I'm telling you, it's just how far.
Well,
I don't know whether or not we can stop him, and I'll hang up. Thanks.
Hey, thank you much for the call, sir. First of all, I think he's a big phony. Number two, I do believe that deep in his heart, he still bears a strong, affinity with these people. The reason no one questions really puts him to the test when it comes to a lot of these decisions and a lot of the bad moves he's made is because he's a person of color. Come on. Media is in love with that notion, and he's a victim, comes from a victimized class, so therefore you can't be asking him these questions, and if you do, you're obviously a racist. We've never been able to get over that hump. He's causing this country to look down and see that we are in mortal danger, and they still can't bring themselves to say this is a problem. You know who would? Take on ISIS.
Now all of a sudden Putin's going wild with bombing ISIS, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing. Who needs to take the credit? Let him have some credit. But I would get everybody together, and I'd blast the hell out of them. They wouldn't be there long, believe me. I would blast the hell out of them.
You know that I read Donald Trump's success because in 2 polls, I mean, it's only grown. In 2 polls in the last week, he is showing either 36% support among Republicans or 42%. Way ahead of everybody else, and his numbers just keep growing. The support is coming from working-class Americans, as it turns out. Yes, he may be worth $10 billion, but he speaks their language. William F. Buckley was the same way. People identified who had some common sense with what the man was talking about. You're up next, and you're on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Good morning, Bill. You're doing a great job, of talking about the problem, and I think most reasonable people see that there is a problem with bringing these unvetted refugees into this country. But, I would love to talk about solutions. I know, the last few months, especially after that staged debacle there at CSI that the Times News put on, what can we as citizens of Idaho do? I know personally I'm trying to get involved with the group that wants to get it on the ballot and put it up for a vote. I think we need to get some of these state representatives behind us and go demand a meeting with Otter and try to get some things changed there from the top and just close, at least Idaho's borders.
Well, he's made the effort. Governor Sandoval in Nevada jumped on board yesterday, which I think was a bit of a surprise. But the fact of the matter is, until you get people in Congress to actually make the change, and they may even have to override the president because he may, simply say, I'm not going to let this thing become law. But they need to take the power away from him and restore it back to the people in the individual states.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much for the telephone call, sir. Russell Singleton coming up with us in just a moment. I believe it's Russell this morning from Trip Family Medicine. And we've got a couple of other guests coming up in the 9 o'clock hour. Should have someone coming in from Twin Falls City Hall, as well as my friend John Brady. Used to do a legal show with me many, many years ago, visiting Twin Falls right now. Expect him in the studio a little bit later this morning. In the meantime, 8:38, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.